Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon. Everybody get chocolate? All right, you can hang with me for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm happy to be here. We're going to talk about relationships today. You all have pens on you? All right, because in your book is the page with some notes on it that I have for you, and feel free to jot further notes as you wish, and feel free to call us at Counseling Services where I work if you have further questions about resources afterward. I'm here, I'm local, and I will answer any questions you have. I'm sure I won't get to everybody today afterwards, so you can find me in Global. How many of you are in a relationship currently? That's impressive. Okay. How many of you find, this is for the men, women to be somewhat of a mystery? Good. Women, how many of you find men to be somewhat of a mystery? All right. It's a mystery. No matter how you dice it, it's a bit of a mystery of relationships. So what we want to do today is a little bit of demystifying this whole experience so that we can feel more successful doing it. And also, as leaders, I want you to have some thoughts and some tips and tools to pass on to your Marines and sailors about how to do this differently. So we're going to cover 3 general topics. Topic number 1 is motivation. So we're going to spend a couple minutes talking about motivation. Now, as you all know, a relationship is different from an arrangement. A relationship is going to involve really 2 people both getting their needs met more often than not. An arrangement is usually, shorter term, and may involve only one person getting their needs met at the expense of the other. And I'm not here to judge it, but I'm here to say, if we're looking at how to do successful relationships, they take different skills than having an arrangement does. So, as you think about a relationship, the first thing I want you to think about is, are you in an arrangement or are you in a relationship? Because if you're in an arrangement where either you're getting taken for granted, or maybe you're doing some taking for granted, it's not going to work out well in the long run as a relationship. It just won't. Different goals. We also have to think about our motivation to become the person we want to be in a relationship. Let's take self-esteem, for example. On a scale of 1 to 10, if 10 is the best self-esteem you've got ever possible, 1 is it's not so good at all. Think about where your self-esteem is and know that you will probably draw to you somebody of similar self-esteem. So let's say you spend the next year kind of working on yourself, you're getting better. A year from now, let's say your self-esteem is sitting at a 7 or an 8 now. Next year it's an 8 or a 9. Probably you're going to draw to you an 8 or a 9. So we want to work on taking care of ourselves and becoming the person we want to be in that relationship, because before we show up and ask somebody else to be there for us, we got to be working on our own stuff, right? We usually know what we want in another person, right? We could make a list of what we want. But are we that person ourselves? Because if we're not that person that we want, they're not going to put up with us. Right? So if you want to draw to you somebody with that really good self-esteem, then make sure you've got it. I heard a quote from a Native American elder once, and he said, men and women should know one another for 4 seasons before they get married. Because we are all different people in the span of a year. Not only do we grow and change, but we have different anniversaries, we have different things we survive and go through. How we handle holidays is often very different. So the concept of knowing one another for a year before getting married isn't that outrageous. But how many times do people fall madly in love and we hear the stories and they're married before they know it in the span of 6 months or so? Anybody ever heard those stories? Now, we're not going to stop anybody from doing that if they're really absolutely determined to do that. But maybe we can talk to them about slowing down and taking their time. Also, have you ever dated somebody that just really looked good on the outside? Looked really good. But then when you got to know him, you started thinking, something not right. Okay, quite put my finger on it, but it's not a good fit. Ever had that? Looks good, sounds good, seems good on the outside right away, and then the longer you go, the worse it gets. I don't know if anyone here has bought a house. Watch those TV shows where people buy houses. There are a lot of houses that look really good on the outside, right? And then comes time for the home inspection, because in theory, you don't want to buy a house without having a home inspection. For obvious reasons. Termites, for one. Right? It can look good on the outside, but it can have some foundation issues. So why is it that we would not buy a house without a home inspection? But we can jump into relationships, commit everything in no time, and end up in big fat trouble. So under the motivation category, I have working on ourselves, knowing whether we want an arrangement or a relationship, taking time to get to know the other person, so that a home inspection is done by the time you're done, and you know what you're getting inside and out. Now that being said, people also change and grow throughout the years, right? So 10, 20 years later, you're going to have learned a lot of stuff you couldn't have known in the first year. But if we can slow it down at the beginning, we can save ourselves a lot of frustration, heartache, and sometimes financial troubles later. Make sense? All right. The second topic that I want to cover, the second area, this is where you may want to write some stuff down. This is where we're going to spend the majority of our time, is on the concept of differences. And I tell people, I want you to expect and respect the differences in one another. And we're going to cover some different things that happen between men and women and different personalities. There's a concept I call mutual respect. For me, that means I have self-respect and I have respect for you. I may not agree with you, but I will not lose my respect for you, which means I won't name call, I won't get mean. Although I may disagree with you and I may not be happy at all. We all make our line in the sand when we are arguing and we are disagreeing. Where we make that line is completely up to us. There will be behaviors we will put in our yes column and behaviors we will put in our no column. And where we put that line is up to us, and I ask you to keep that line as solid as you can. There are going to be differences, and many times you're going to think that your partner is really just trying to piss you off on purpose. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't sometimes happen, but let's talk about some differences. Difference number one, introverts and extroverts. You guys heard those words? Introverts. Introverts are people who may be very outgoing. However, when it comes time to think about stuff, they do it inside. They do it quietly, and it may take them quite some time. They recharge by being alone. Extroverts, on the other hand, usually recharge in the presence of others. They usually have more words in a day. They're going to talk more than introverts. You can tell introverts and extroverts even in texting, because introverts probably text entire sentences that are 1 or 2 words. It's an introvert texting. An extrovert texting, you're going to get paragraphs, right? Just simple things like, how's your day? An introvert can probably answer that in 1 or 2 words. An extrovert, you're going to have everything, lots of stuff. This is important because introverts and extroverts tend to get together. They like each other. They like the differences. And it works out really well when it's working well. And then conflict happens. And now you've got that extrovert saying to that introvert, what are you thinking? And the introvert says, well, why won't you talk to me? Now here's the thing about introverts. Introverts don't like lots of questions. They take every question very seriously, and it takes them quite a while to respond to them. So if an extrovert says to the introvert, how are you? First of all, that introvert is going to take some time to answer that. That can, to an extrovert, feel like somebody's not really showing up. But that's not the truth. They are showing up. They're taking their time to think about it. Does that fit for anybody? So if you ask an introvert a question, you can expect that it is going to take some time for them to come up with an answer. This might be hours, it might be days. Even something as simple as, where would you like to go to dinner tonight? What might an introvert say to that? I don't care. I don't know. It's up to you. Or just, If you ask an extrovert, where would you like to go to dinner tonight? I guarantee you're going to get a different answer. You might get 5 restaurants in the span of about 5 seconds. Well, I was thinking about this, and then I was thinking about this, and what about this? I haven't been there in a while, right? Now for the introvert, this is stressful, and you know who you are, because now you're thinking, okay, and you're following these 5 answers around, right? And you're exhausted, and you haven't even figured out where you're going to dinner yet. You're thinking, just pick something. Simple, but it's a difference. And nobody's trying to piss each other off. All right, how many of you would say that you're an introvert? Okay, so those of you who are introverts with your hands up, how many of you would say you've paired yourself with an extrovert? Yes, so you feel my pain, right? You feel the stress. You know what I'm talking about. All right, extroverts, how many extroverts? Yes, and how many of you extroverts have paired yourselves with an introvert? Yeah. How many extroverts are with extroverts? What do you say? Ooh, that's easy. Nobody gets tired. How many introverts have paired themselves with introverts? Yeah, okay. So you know who you are. Now, again, this is a gross generalization. People are all over this continuum. Some people are very extroverted, some people are extremely introverted, and many people fall in the middle. I talk about this because I want people to have a sense of those differences. They roll out in communication all the time. Because introverts will communicate differently from extroverts, and each will think the other is doing it wrong because it's such a different communication style. And if we can understand it for what it is, we then know it's not wrong, it's just different. Alice, when she was speaking earlier today, was talking about the importance of taking time-outs sometimes, right? That if someone is upset, to take a time-out, get the brain back online, come back, resolve it. Who do you think is going to like time-outs, introverts or extroverts? Yes, introverts would like to take time-outs, sometimes for extended periods of time. So if an introvert wants to take a time-out, what do you think that extrovert's going to be liable to do? They want to talk about it, right? They want to resolve it now. Right? So one tries to leave and the other follows. She talked about that in terms of chasing. Right? So here's the thing about timeouts that I want to say. Timeouts are a great concept. To the extent that you know if you're an introvert or extrovert, you have a different job in a timeout. The introvert's job is to say, I will be back in 30 minutes and show up, or whatever time you've allotted. Doesn't matter. The introvert has to actually make a sentence saying, I will be back, and then come back. It's their job. The extrovert has to have the patience to trust that introvert's coming back and not chase them and follow them from room to room and around the house. Not call and text. Give them their time to take their break, and they will come back better. Introverts need time. So if people can understand just that difference and not personalize it, then nobody needs to chase anybody around the house. Now that takes practice, right? And that takes trust. Because that introvert actually has to make the sentence that says, I'll be back, and then come back. And the extrovert has to trust it and really hang out. So everybody has a different job depending upon whether they are introverts or extroverts. And then timeouts can work beautifully. So under mutual respect, understanding the difference between an introvert and an extrovert is really important. Now, let's talk about some socialization differences. If we have a little boy, let's say we have a toddler, a little 2-year-old, and he falls down and he cries, because at 2, they do that. Even at 3 and 4, they do that. When he falls down and he cries, what do people tell him? Right, shut up, knock it off, suck it up, some version of that, right? You're fine, right? When a little girl, say 2, 3, 4, falls down and she cries, well, what do we tell her? Oh, even the crowd sounds more empathic, right? Even the tone sounds different. At a very early age, we often give children very different messages about their feelings, right? Okay, now let's fast forward into adulthood. All right, guys. Now you're dating, you're married, and she says to you, how do you feel? Now what do you say? Fine, hungry, tired, maybe pissed off. If we're lucky, we get some kind of feeling word. You see, men from the very earliest age have been taught not to have feelings. Therefore, why do we need to even have a feelings vocabulary? So unfortunately, then you grow up and you've got some woman looking at you going, so how do you feel about that? And you're thinking, I don't know. Or fine. And does that work out well? You ever been asked that question? And when you answer with fine, how does that go? It doesn't go so well, right? Start digging. So what I tell people is, it is okay that there are differences in socialization, but it is also important, and this works for some women too, to develop a feelings vocabulary. So I want you to add like 5 feelings words to your vocabulary if you don't already have them. They can be anything other than pissed off, hungry, tired, sad, frustrated, confused, content, happy. Doesn't matter. You just got to have 5. Even 5 will help. It helps calm things down. Okay? And then you got to use them when you get asked. Part of what is so important in our relationships is to be able to convey that to another person. And again, that will probably always be easier for extroverts than introverts, because extroverts have more words, but we can practice it. So one of the differences, and I talk often with women about this, is when you ask him how he feels and he doesn't know or he can't tell you, he's not trying to piss you off. He may not know. He's probably not been asked in a lot of years. This is not a vocabulary that has been encouraged for the last 20 years. So give him a break. Right? Not trying to piss you off. Because so many times when people come to see us for counseling, they are adamant at that time that this person is really their enemy and they're trying to piss them off. And one of our biggest jobs is to say, you know what, it's probably not that, but it could be a lot of other things. So we've got the differences, introverts, extroverts. We've got the socialization differences. And now let's talk about the brain for a minute. The wiring differences. Men and women are apparently wired neurologically a little different. Anybody heard of a man named Mark Gungor? Mark Gungor, and this is on the page of the handout in there. His website is in there. It's called laughyourway.com. He does a funny little YouTube gig where he talks about the differences between men and women's brains. And he says in essence, this is from the neurology research, if you were to go and open up the back of a man's brain and take a look, you would see all these little boxes. We have a box for work, we have a box for the car, we have a box for you, we have a box for your mother-in-law in the basement. Most importantly, we have a nothing box. It's our favorite box. We go there whenever we can. Then he says, if you were to go and open up the back of a woman's brain and look inside, anybody getting nervous just thinking about it? It sort of look like spaghetti. It'd be this super internet highway where everything's connected to emotion. Close that box. So, why is this important? Sometimes when she says to him, what are you thinking? And he says nothing. Apparently he means it. There's really a nothing box. This is how we know this can be true. They hooked men's brains up and women's brains up, and then they asked men to power down. Okay, so chill. Let's take a look at their neurological activity. What's the brain really doing now? And apparently you guys almost flatline. You're really capable of the nothing box. It's true. Had I not seen that research from my own eyes, I would have believed it, because I don't have that brain. Ask anybody who knows me well. When they asked women to power down, there was all this electrical stuff still going on. And yet women were saying they were powered down. They were calm, they were cool, they were powered down. It's no surprise, is it? Really? Now, if we know that neurologically that's a fact, we are that different, biochemically and neurologically, then it's not that we're trying to piss each other off, right? So when she says, "What are you thinking?" and he says nothing, he probably really means it. Until she says it again, and then he looks annoyed, and she says, "No, I know you're thinking something," and he's now thinking, "Well, I was fine until you asked me again." Now there is something, and we're out of the nothing box. So there is a difference neurologically between men and women's brains. That's nice to know, right? All right, let's talk about one last category of differences that I like to cover. In the beginning of a relationship, there are certain hormones released in the first 6 months to a year that are akin to adrenaline, that make us feel in love, make us lose our appetite, make us stay up all night and talk, even the introverts. These chemicals seem to be rather universal. That's how we know we're sort of in love versus this is just a one-time date and I'm done. These chemicals, however, do not last forever. If they did, we would be exhausted. We would have adrenal fatigue. So it is human nature that those chemicals quiet down, and as a relationship continues, other chemicals are released. One famous one is called oxytocin. Anybody ever heard of that? They call it the cuddle hormone. This is not an adrenaline-like hormone. It is a more stable hormone that makes people want to settle down, make babies, buy a house. What sometimes happens for couples is when that initial adrenaline rush wears off, they now look at their partner and think, "God, I don't know what's wrong, but I just don't think I'm in love anymore. I just don't feel it." And so often that rolls out panic, and people think, "Oh my God, I must have to end this relationship. I don't have that adrenaline rush anymore." Here's the thing, if you have that in the beginning, that will come and go throughout your relationship. That's sort of the chemistry of it all. But it's not designed to be there constantly, or you would be exhausted, and you'd probably never go to work. You'd be very busy doing other things. Eventually we have to get back to work, right? So I like people to know that. That is normal, that is common, and those chemicals will wax and wane. You're still as hot as you were, you're still as funny. It's just a difference. Look at all those differences, right? So I tell people, if that starts happening in your relationship, I mean, it may be that it's not the right relationship, and you'll know that for other reasons. There'll be red flags. But it may just be a difference in the stage of the relationship. After about a year, it's going to change. It just does, hormonally, biochemically. Does that make sense? Anybody who's had a long enough relationship know that shift and that transition? No need to panic. It's not time to panic. It's okay. And also by that point, you know that much more about the person. So at this point now, they're probably becoming more your best friend, right? You're spending more time together, hopefully. It's all going well. All right. So those are lots of differences, and I think it is important for us to be able to notice those without judging them, and notice how and why it might be different. Another thing I think that is very important as we think about the mutual respect, not so much about differences, but the mutual respect concept is this, and several people have talked about empathy today. Empathy is the ability to put yourself in another's shoes. This is very difficult when we're arguing, because what's more important than our point when we're arguing, right? And convincing somebody of our point becomes very important to us. There's a man named Gottman who studied divorce, what keeps couples together, what makes couples divorce. And one of the common things that he found in terms of divorce was a concept he called contempt. Another word for contempt is disgust. If we feel disgusted in another, and that's not angry or pissed off, that's disgust. I don't respect you, I think you're an idiot. Disgust. We are more liable to move our line in the sand and become disrespectful. We are more liable to use violence as a way of coping. We are just more liable to be mean and not our best people. So I always ask people to notice if you're feeling contempt with a certain partner. Notice also if you have a history and a pattern in relationships of feeling contempt, or if it is just with this person. If you have a history and a pattern of relationships that tend to go south because you think that they're all idiots in the end, then probably the issue is with you. You can go take a look at that. If, however, you've had a history of, relationships that maybe haven't worked out, but where you've left on amicable terms, you've respected them, but you feel contempt for this one individual, the issue might be them. But it will become your issue if you stick around. Does that make sense? So if there's no history and pattern, you've always had decent relationships, and all of a sudden you just can't stand this human being, please don't necessarily stay unless you can change your belief about that person. So watch for contempt. It'll feel like disgust. You won't like the feeling, and you'll be well aware of it. You may have very good reasons for having it, in fact. But it puts us at risk for really challenging relationships, and that's when I ask people to go get help, read a book, do something to manage that feeling, because it can be dangerous. I'm going to give you an example of empathy. I had this neighbor. He was 84, and he'd been married for close to 50 years. And his wife got sick, and she was dying. And because I live in Oceanside, and all the houses are on top of each other, we can hear just about everything from our neighbors. And sometimes I would hear her yell, and I would hear him come outside, and you'd hear the screen door slam, and he'd put on his garden gloves, and he would just go garden. I think he was taking a time out. And she was sort of housebound, and he had made her this daisy garden, this huge daisy garden, because she would have to sit in this chair in the living room a lot, and he wanted her to have these flowers to look out on because daisies were her favorite flowers. So when they would argue, and I would sort of hear them, he would come out and he would garden. A little bit later I would smell food, and I knew she was inside cooking. And you wouldn't hear anything else the rest of the night. He'd go in, they'd eat, I'm sure it was all good. She gets sick, she dies. One night he shows up at my doorstep at like dusk. I see him standing outside my screen door with his little blue zip-up jacket and his hat. He was also at 84 an avid golfer. He golfed every week, and he rode his bike every day. He was a cool guy. I said, Roy, what's up? And he had a tear in his eye, and he said to me, this is the only thing he said standing outside my door, I ate the last steak. Before she died, she had cooked his favorite meals and stuck a bunch of them in the freezer. That was her empathy, knowing that she wouldn't be around forever, knowing how much her food meant to him. Even though they argued, they managed it. He'd go outside, he maintained his mutual respect, he didn't yell back, he gardened, he did something that calmed him. She cooked, so she didn't hold on to it either, right? She wasn't in there throwing the food at him, she was cooking. He would go back in, they worked it out. It wasn't that it was a problem-free relationship, it was that they had the tools to maintain the mutual respect and to work out the conflict. So I give you that just as one example, and I'm sure in your families, in your own relationships, in relationships of friends, you have these examples. When we get stuck and we get frustrated, what I ask people to do is to imagine who does it well. If there's an area in which I struggle, I want to know who's doing this better than I am so that I can model myself after that. Because there are ways to do that. And if you've ever done that rather than kick it up a notch and you find you can diffuse a really bad situation, can you think of a time when you had some conflict and you were able to do that and it diffused it? Sometimes it's using humor. Sometimes that backfires though. Kind of depends upon our timing. Sometimes it's saying, I understand. Sometimes it's saying, I don't understand, but I'm willing to. Empathy. So in maintaining the mutual respect, if we can just put ourselves in that other person's shoes briefly, we're going to be a whole lot better off. And that's hard to do, because often we're holding on to our own point, right? We always have a point. I always have a point. All right, so there are our differences under mutual respect. Expect and respect the differences. Expect them, they're going to happen. Unless you stay alone, right? Then we're only arguing with ourselves about what movie we go to and what we eat tonight. All right, so let's also talk a little bit about Third concept, communication, compromise, connection. We are wired to be connected with others. We are not wired to be alone in this world. General Graham was talking about the foot in the cold water and how we can tolerate it longer in the presence of another. That's universal, and this is why from our infancy we bond to others. I don't know if you've ever heard the stories about the Romanian babies in the orphanages years ago, and the Romanian babies were dying. They were fed, they were clothed, but there were not enough caretakers to touch them and look at them and respond to them emotionally. You know, like if the baby cried, they got left to cry. And they were dying. And people were shocked. They had no idea why these babies were dying, because they were fed, they were clothed, and they had shelter. That is when we learned, unfortunately, it's a hell of a way to learn that lesson, that we are wired for touch and connection. We need to be seen and we need to be heard. Now, we need to be seen and we need to be heard and we need to be touched. I always talk about those massage parlors that are open after 9 at night with a little red light. Yeah. Okay, so we don't die if we don't get touched as adults, but we get really kind of funny. And the massage parlors are very busy places, I hear. We all need touch. We do, and we're going to get it one way or another. As infants, we will die without it. Have you ever been just misunderstood? You communicate something, somebody misunderstands you? It's annoying at the very least. At the very most, it sends us to be misperceived or misinterpreted. Everybody know what I mean? Can you think of an example? I'm going to go back to infancy for a minute. If a baby is crying and screaming and somebody laughs at that baby, like in that baby's face, what that will do is distress the baby more. They will cry even more. If you've ever tried it, it doesn't work out well. They don't start laughing, by the way. They cry more. They actually get rather panicky. Again, in the hard wiring, we are wired to need to be seen and heard accurately. So even a baby who doesn't have a lot of left brain activity yet, little kid, knows on some fundamental level something ain't right. I'm distressed and they're laughing. Likewise, when we leave babies to cry, we used to think that we could spoil a baby, right? Now we know better. They literally need to be responded to. They need to have an adult face go, oh, what's up? Or they get more distressed. As adults, we still have those same needs. And no, it won't kill us if we're not seen and heard accurately, but it will frustrate us. Have you ever come home from work to a bad face, a mad face, an irritated face, when all you wanted was just to be greeted? Have you ever been that person to do the negative greeting? It's distressing. So one of the things I think is important, more than what it is we say, more than those basic communication skills, is to know that we need to be seen and heard, as do our partners. We don't need to fix it as much as we need to just sit and listen to it, like we do as leaders, right? You can't fix your Marines' personal lives, but you can show up and say, what's up? You don't look like yourself. How's your day? Anybody ever got in trouble for something, and rather than being, well, let's say this, have you ever done anything wrong, and rather than getting into trouble right away, a good leader said, what's up? This isn't typical of you. That rolls out far better than immediate punitive action, right? Because we usually got a reason why something ain't right. And just to be asked can help tremendously. Same in our personal relationships. If something's not right, we can ask, what's not right? You're not yourself today. We can ask. We may not fix it. We don't have to, often. There's this concept I call, let me go and welcome me home. We all have a need to be let go of, to be independent, to be able to go to work, to do our job without 101 questions, without 101 texts during the day. We all have a need to be trusted. Let me go. I'll be back. Can we do that for our partners? Let them go. What if they want to go out with their friends? Do we let them go and say, you know what, have a good time. I know where I'll find you. I know you'll be back. Because when we can do that, they come running back. They're thrilled to come back to us. We love to be let go of. Because when we're let go of, we love to come back. Anybody know that experience? But we also love to be welcomed back. When we come back, we don't want people going, well, why are you late and what happened and how come you didn't call? Right? So one of the problems that sometimes happens in relationships is just the ability to let somebody go and to welcome them home. Can you think of examples where in a relationship somebody was able to just let you go and say, have a great day? And then when you got home, they said, so glad you're home, I missed you. While we're away, we like some contact often, like we don't mind if they call or text, stay in touch, right? We just don't want to be suffocated by it. So part of this attachment stuff, when General Graham was talking about that foot in the cold water and how it helped to have that person right there, is we need to know, even when we're out in the world doing our thing, that there's somebody who cares about us. Because we're wired for connection. So it is okay to want to need that. The other question is, can we give that to somebody else? Can we let them go? Can we welcome them home? Do we find that we have some jealous and controlling behaviors that we need to monitor? Maybe we have reason to be jealous. We still have to own it and we still have to wrestle with it. We still have to do that respectfully. So think of that concept, let me go and welcome me home, and practice that in your own relationships. And for some of us, it's easier to let them go than it is to welcome them home. For some, it's easier to welcome them home than it is to let them go. It's the same with our kids, actually. We send them off to school. Sometimes it's easier to let them go. Sometimes it's easier to welcome them home. So we're going to have differences in that. All right, you guys are doing really well. The chocolate must have helped. I had some good chocolate. There's a psychologist who wrote a book called The 5 Love Languages. How many of you are familiar with the 5 Love Languages? Oh, I love that. The Marine Corps likes the 5 Love Languages. We have workshops on base about the 5 Love Languages. I want to talk for a few minutes about the 5 Love Languages. The psychologist came up with this idea that we love and demonstrate our love differently depending upon who we are. And he said in general there's 5 different ways we do this. Some of us feel most loved when we are given what he calls words of affirmation, the attaboys. Some of us feel most loved when somebody says to us, you rock, good job, I'm proud of you. Words of affirmation, one type of a love language. Another type of love language is quality time. Some people don't necessarily need the words, but they want time with their partner doing stuff, just partner stuff. Some people are acts of service people. That would be the honey-do list. Some people feel loved when that partner can take out the trash and mow the lawn and do the little things, sew the buttons on the shirts. Acts of service. Some people are physical touch people. They don't need a lot of words, but come cuddle. It's not just the sex, it's, the cuddling too. Physical touch. And some people are gift givers. They feel most loved when they are giving and receiving gifts. Interestingly, couples often have different love languages. And here's where this becomes a problem. I knew a couple who had an argument. She was an acts of service woman. He was a gift giver. They argued. He went out and bought her a pearl necklace and he brought it home. He was quite happy. He loved gifts, so he did what he thought she would like. How do you think that went over? She's acts of service. Yeah. She felt completely not seen or heard accurately. Remember we talked a few minutes ago about what it feels like inside when we are not seen or heard accurately. It makes us fussy. So she's looking at this necklace and she's thinking, all I've asked is for you to help around the house. And you spent money we don't have and got me a necklace. Right? So she throws it at him. It didn't work out well. Now he's not feeling loved, right? Because he's not feeling appreciated. His second love language was, the attaboys, the words of affirmation. So it didn't go well for him at all. Didn't go well for her either. But here's the thing. They both meant well. It wasn't that they didn't love each other. They had different love languages. So once somebody was able to sit them down and say, look, this is how this is. You can do this. Right? Give her what she needs. Kids are really good at this. Anybody have kids? You know, kids will bring you their favorite gifts, right? It's like a rock, a leaf. You got to keep this stuff too, because they keep track, right? Stuff. Because they're so egocentric, they're going to bring you what they think is amazing, and you're thinking, all right, got it. You can't throw it away. You got to keep it all. We're kind of that way even as adults. We tend to give people what we want. But in order to have successful partnering, you got to figure out what your partner wants. So as I went through those 5, can you think of your top 2 or 3? Does everybody know who they are? Words of affirmation, quality time, gift giving, physical touch, acts of service. And then think about your partners. Do you know what they are? If you don't, ask them. Go to a workshop, we've got them on base, get the book. Just have a conversation around it. And you probably already know, right? You probably ended up in conflicts when these are different. Again, it's a difference. But in terms of how we communicate to one another, that immediately affects our communication. If you know their love language, you can do that differently. Nice to know, huh? And it's not even personal. So if he or she isn't appreciating what it is you're giving them, it may be that you're speaking different languages. You can do that differently. That's just a little fine-tuning, just being aware of it. Okay, so far so good? All right. I have a quote from a man named William James that I found the other day, and he said, "The art of being wise is knowing what to overlook." When we argue, it is very easy to make every hill the hill to die on, because we know our points and we want to be right. And I knew this couple, I tell this story all the time and it still makes me laugh. They were disagreeing about the placement of Alaska. One thought Alaska was down near Mexico. You all know why, right? And this half of the couple was adamant that Alaska was down near Mexico. And the other partner was just as adamant that no, it really isn't. And overhearing their argument, I thought, oh my God, this is going to land them on the brink of divorce, and it's just about Alaska. But it got really, really heated because they were really adamant. So I think the concept of knowing what to overlook takes on a whole new meaning when we're arguing and disagreeing with our partners. And you know, my 84-year-old neighbor Roy, I'd asked him one time, Roy, how'd you do this? 50 years, how do you do this? You still like her? He said, well, I garden a lot, and I say yes dear a lot. And I knew that yes dear wasn't necessarily agreeing with her, it was sort of keeping the peace. But I think sometimes if we can soften our approach and decide that not every hill needs to have that battle, we'll save ourselves the adrenal fatigue, first of all, but we will also save ourselves conflict and going to sleep upset with the person we love. And maybe we have to table something and resolve it later. You know, the idea of partnership is that it really is a democracy, and the funny thing about that is we don't have a lot of role modeling that. We don't have a lot of democracy in the Marine Corps, right? It's not like you get to go to work and have a lot of say. Either you're telling somebody something or they're telling you, which works out really, really well at work. But have you ever gone home and tried to do that? How does that work? It doesn't usually work well, right? And yet the skills of negotiation, the skills to take our time and do that are not necessarily our strengths. And if you know where Alaska is and your partner doesn't, that'd be really easy to want to get into. The interesting thing is, sometimes when we let go and we stop that fight, they go look up Alaska on their own. They may not tell us they did, but they do. And I use that analogy to say, it's okay to not have to have every fight be a fight. You can go, okay, got it. Could be a difference. Sometimes people kind of know that they might be off, but they want to save face. So we can also let each other save face. We can do that. One of the things I tell women often is that men need this thing called emotional loyalty. And that is that he needs to know you've got his back. That you may know all the secrets and you may know the jokes, but you don't tell them in public, even if you think they're really funny. You have his back. You make him look good, you prop him up. Now that doesn't mean there may not be a conversation for later. I can think of an example even between my parents when I was growing up. My mother always set the curfew for some reason, so Friday night, I'm in high school, my sister and I, we want to go out, curfew's midnight. All of a sudden my dad pipes up and he says, be home at 9:30. I'm like, really? So we looked at Dad, and we looked at Mom, we thought, that's weird. And Mom said, you heard your father. Off we went. We were home at 9:30 that night. It never happened again. I have no idea what conversation they had. They did not have it in front of us. She propped him up. She supported him. Can you imagine how that would have been had she sold him downstream in front of the kids? Ooh, it would have been ugly. And it was weird. Let me just say, as the teenager, thinking 9:30? I've been home at 9:30? I can't remember when. But she taught me an important lesson in that moment. And I'm sure there was a conversation because curfew went back to midnight after that. But it was done respectfully. Right, so I say that just to say that it is okay to have the differences. How and when we handle them is really the art of it all, is the art of the relationship. Knowing when to hold our tongue, knowing when to make that the hill to do battle on or not, is such a difficult piece. But we don't have to win everything. We have to think, do I want to win or lose, or do I want to wake up with you? Because I can win, but I may not be waking up with you. That's the difference. So we have to think about our end goal, which is hard. It is hard. All right, one last thing. The role of forgiveness. In any relationship that's been going on for any length of time, there will be betrayals. I guarantee you there will be betrayals. These betrayals are often innocent in that they are not intended to do harm. They may be small betrayals, they may be medium betrayals, they may be large betrayals. Relationships can survive all sorts of betrayals, but they demand a process of forgiveness. And forgiveness is not an event, it is a process, and it takes time. And it also takes two people. I say that because, have you ever made a mistake and apologized? For those of us who make mistakes and apologize, we feel so crummy about it that we really want the other person to just forget and move on now, right? And that's human nature. And it usually has to do with the fact that our conscience is gnawing at us. So it's understandable that we want that. However, it's going to take the other person a bit of time. And what we do in the meantime is really important. How we manage ourselves in the meantime is of utmost importance. So I always want people to know that there is hope when there have been betrayals, and that forgiveness happens with all sorts of things. All sorts of things. And that couples can make it through all sorts of betrayals. When we remember that some of these betrayals are accidental, they come from just the differences, and we covered a lot of that today, that can make it easier. Some are less egregious than others. But know that there is almost always hope. And if you're the one who made the mistake, your job is just to toe the line and continue to be accountable for, I made that mistake, what can I do to make it better? And all you got to do is ask that question. If you're the one who's doing the forgiveness, you've got to commit yourself to a process of forgiveness, not beating them over the head with it repeatedly. Doesn't mean it's not going to come up. It doesn't mean it's not going to be discussed repeatedly. But how that is done needs to be respectful. Sometimes that takes third-party intervention. Sometimes we just can't work it out on our own. That's what some of the tables outside are for. The Focus Project, Military One Source. TRICARE, resources. There are people who know, chaplains, cradle retreats, There are people who know how to help people manage through those really complicated emotions and situations. They do it every day. They help couples succeed every day. I guarantee you, anybody who's been married 50 years has had their share of stuff. That relationship 50 years later does not look at all like it did the first year, not even the first 25 years. So it is okay. So I want to end on that note that there is hope, and that often all we have to do is just fine-tune the skills we already have. Because we've learned a lot, whether it's through watching our families, whether it's through having our own successful relationships. It's not like we need an overhaul. We just need to fine-tune. Make sure we're being the partner we want to be. Partner well, choose wisely. You get what you aim for and you get what you settle for. And know that we can overcome just about anything and have healing, healthy, calming relationships. Thank you for your time.